Months before, American leaders had decided that the air war in the South would, if necessary, take priority over operations against the North. Hundreds of transport aircraft and fighter bombers supported American troops. Strike aircraft could be called in by any combat unit in the field. Time after time, their bombs, rockets, and napalm saved American units being overrun by the Viet Cong, but they also hit thousands of civilians in their homes. Against Viet Cong troops in the open, tactical fighter bombers were accurate and destructive weapons. However, against fortified guerrilla bases spread out under the forest canopy, they were almost useless. The solution suggested by the U.S. commander in Vietnam, General Westmoreland, was to carpet bomb with B-52s. The B-52 could carry 51 750 and 500-pound bombs, a 13.5-ton payload. A modified version, the Big Belly, could carry 108 750 and 500-pound bombs, a massive 31.75 tons. A cell of 3 B-52s could obliterate an area 3 miles long and 2 miles wide. B-52 raids were codenamed Arclight. Each raid had involved a 12-hour round trip from Guam in the Pacific Ocean. The missions were possible only because for every bomber in the fleet, there was a tanker from Okinawa to refuel it in flight. The mission of the B-52 force was soon broadened to include the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos and passes feeding the trail just inside North Vietnam. The bombers were also accurate enough to support U.S. troops on the ground. Radar could direct the B-52s to a target day or night up to 200 miles away and tell the crew exactly when to drop their bombs. Although fighter bombers were flying the vast majority of Niagara missions, most of the sheer weight of bombs was being delivered by B-52s as part of an ongoing operation codenamed Arclight. The strikes were flown around the clock. A cell of 3 B-52s arrived over the Khe Sanh area every 90 minutes. The giant heavy bomber was able to carry a massive 27 tons of bombs. The aircraft dropped their loads from 30,000 feet, high enough so that the planes couldn't be seen or heard from the ground. The only warning most North Vietnamese troops got of a raid was the shattering detonation of the first bombs. Over the 77 days of the siege, B-52s flew over 2,500 sorties, dropping more than 53,000 tons of bombs. The biggest Arclight raid of the Vietnam War so far was launched as part of Operation Niagara on January 30th. American radio direction finding seemed to have discovered North Vietnamese Army headquarters for the Khe Sanh offensive. Whether it was or not, no one is sure, but the site was annihilated by 2 B-52 raids in a single day. Operation Menu saw more than 4,000 B-52 missions, dropping 120,000 tons of bombs. In later campaigns, B-52s supported American and South Vietnamese ground incursions into Cambodia and backed Cambodian government forces against the Khmer Rouge guerrillas. Altogether, in 4 years of bombing, U.S. aircraft would unload more than 500,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia. On orders from the White House, extraordinary measures were taken to keep the Cambodian bombing a secret. Defense Department officials always claimed the raids were over South Vietnam. Because the planes were guided to their target by radar at the Bien Hoa air bases, and orders to drop the bombs were also issued from there, often the pilots themselves did not know they were bombing Cambodia. Those that did were ordered to falsify their flight logs upon returning to base to maintain the secrecy. In spite of the elaborate precautions, in May 1969, reports of the secret bombing were published in the American press. Nixon was furious. American bombers, including B-52s, were attacking military facilities, supply depots, rail yards, and fuel storage. North Vietnamese leaders had expected the raids, but they were sure that pressure from their allies, the Soviet Union and China, would stop the Americans launching an all-out air offensive. The North had miscalculated badly. Both superpowers were far more interested in good relations with the Americans than with the fate of Vietnam. The American airstrikes on both South and North Vietnam were launched by Air Force planes from Thailand, Navy aircraft from carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin, and B-52s from Thailand and the Pacific. By June, 77 aircraft were brought down by NVA gunfire. The attacks swept northward and within 2 weeks were hitting targets around Hanoi and Haiphong. In a second phase, codenamed Operation Linebacker, power stations and airfields were hit. The strategic port of Haiphong and 6 other harbors were mined and closed to all sea traffic. Soon after, the rail and road transport links to China were the targets for heavy raids.
United States forces have been directed to take appropriate measures.
With Operation Linebacker, the American President Richard Nixon meant to force North Vietnam's leaders to call off their offensive against the South and negotiate a peace. It was a ferocious campaign. The intensity of the bombing shocked North Vietnamese leaders. Worst of all, their allies did no more than protest. Even when Soviet ships in Haiphong were damaged, there was no dramatic reaction from the Russians. He had won a landslide victory in the presidential elections, and with his popularity at its height, he was determined to force a solution. He ordered his military chiefs to prepare a massive bombing campaign against North Vietnam. Publicly, he gave northern leaders 72 hours to agree to return to the negotiating table. On December 18, 1972, President Nixon ordered the new bombing campaign to begin. Soon known as Linebacker II, it would last for 12 days and would include a 3-day all-out effort by up to 120 B-52 bombers. Strategic surgical strikes were planned on fighter airfields, transport targets, and supply depots in and around Hanoi and Haiphong. This time, the majority of the attacks were carried out with deadly precision. They were mounted by Navy A-6 intruders and Air Force F-111s. The B-52s struck by night. North Vietnamese anti-aircraft defenses reacted furiously. As the defenses learned the paths taken by the B-52s to and from their targets, SAM anti-aircraft missiles took a heavy toll. 15 B-52s were shot down. After the Americans changed to less predictable flight paths, losses fell dramatically. By the 11th day, when North Vietnam agreed to talk peace, its air defense system had been wrecked. The bombers had utterly destroyed the North's industries, power plants, and transport system, and mistakenly hit the city's Bach Mai hospital. In Linebacker II, U.S. aircraft had dropped more than 20,000 tons of bombs. 26 planes